Yeah, all of what you just heard is very interesting. Hal's a colleague. We've been at this for decades, literally. And what I'm going to suggest is that while the story that came out in the New York Times said, wow, isn't it wonderful and new, I'm going to tell you about some things that are probably not so new. This is some young guy who was in the Pentagon and decided to do that. I'll tell you about my position, just so you know. It says UFOs by definition must be real. It doesn't state what they are. The evidence that supports, the physical evidence supporting, the reality, I think, is absolutely overwhelming. And my bottom line, in fact, the last line in the book is that whatever this is, it is terribly complex. I also do all of my things with a bias, so you know up front. A lot of people don't know what they're biased to, but mine is. And mine is that when you look at all this wide range of phenomena, from remote viewing, near-death studies, post-mortem communication, even interspecies communication, psychokinesis, and even cryptozoology and UFOs, I think they're all connected, and that consciousness is a key piece. And I've been involved in studies with most of them. So here's the good news and the bad news. As you keep saying, what the government knows, what is the government healing? Well, first of all, you have to understand the complexity of the government. We have three branches in the government, as you know, the executive, legislative, and judicial. When you start looking at what does that mean in the pure number of people, civilian, we're talking federal government level, about 2.7 million civilians in there, more than 2 million additional in the military, both active and reserve. I'll use about a 10% figure. What we know from various surveys is about 10% of the population believe they have seen a UFO. You get into the broader phenomena, you get up in the 70% level who have That means a hell of a lot of these people have probably seen UFOs. But from an institutional perspective, most of them don't care, okay? When you get institutionally, don't care. But that doesn't mean that a few people, and it's like the group that Hal just talked about, do care, and some of them passionately. Here's this one. One of my favorite lines is, the Pentagon says. Well, the Pentagon says nothing. It's a big stone building with 25, 30,000 people in there that come with a wide variety of belief systems and experiences. And contrary to popular belief, like the government, it is not a megalithic organization where everybody agrees on everything, and some of them, vehemently disagree. One of my edges, I did this one up to look. It turns out that there are now 962 field grade or flag grade officers, meaning generals and admirals, within the Department of Defense. So I extrapolated and looked at, Al mentioned the end of Blue Book content, I'll come to that in a minute. My guess is, conservatively, there's at least 6,000 general officers, flag grade officers since that time. If that many have seen UFOs, book, one of the things I mentioned, I talked to the director of one of these three-letter agencies who said, A, well, this is going back, A, we don't do that. B, I'll tell you about the ones I saw. So you have a director of an agency who has personal experience that does not translate into institutional responsibility. So my question is not why do these studies pop up, is why aren't there a lot more? Now, part of the problem is this. This is a ranger killed on his 14th combat tour. And so what I ask is, from a DOD perspective, just where is it that you think UFOs fit on their priority list, being that we have been constantly in conflict since 2001, they say the longest wars that we've had. So there is an issue of prioritization. One of the things I think that's important is that very few people understand how large organizations work, and that's really a key issue, and a lot of critical thinking is lacking in many, many areas. So the key question from the government's perspective is compared to what? With all of the things that are going on. And the same thing even with UFOs. Most people believe in UFOs. A very small segment think it's really important. So most people, say, okay, that's real, but so what? Not really important. So about big organizations, and the bottom line is what I really wanted to get to here. This is how they work. Top priorities are, of course, retaining power, the golden rule, meaning he who has the gold makes the rules, and they're logic-based organizations. But at the bottom line is, in the U.S. government, there are no departments of good ideas. So whoever has, responsibility here has to take, interest in these areas and fit it into their institutional responsibilities. When I say this is not new, Hal knows as well, is in the early 1980s, I actually created a group very similar to what Lou Alessandro and others brought up. We had Army, Navy, Air Force, all participants, the intelligence community from various agencies across the board, and Hal was one, and a number of our friends who had, from aerospace industry, all actively involved. They all had top secret SCI level clearances, literally an old boy net, i.e. they happened to be all males, had to know who you were. But what we found out was kind of not what we expected, and primarily that was nobody's minding the store. Hal mentioned the Condon report. I don't think you can underestimate the damage that was done by that. It was a very cursory report, not well done. The material inside, actually the body of the text does not match the summary recommendations and conclusions written by Condon, but the top line is he was right. The question to Condon was not, are UFOs real? It was, is this a threat? And haven't been invaded, so you have to say, kind of like, no, it's probably not a threat. This was our suspected scenario, an area of disagreement. Some others think is true, but it was that Roswell was real. Looked at it, said, what the hell, don't know what this is. We'll pack it up and revisit it periodically. Now, here are some actual slides that were done, like I say, at least 30 years ago, and what you'll see are the parallels between the current problems. That it was a threat, the potential for cover and deception, the advanced technology. We were looking at that, and one that Hal mentioned, in this case the Soviet, this is the bad old days, the Soviet breakthrough would be unacceptable. Didn't matter, said whether or not, can't tell, that is important. Let me apologize to people not steeped in UFO, and I'll be glad to explain these cases. I'm going to hit some of them pretty quickly. But what did we see? So again, we're talking 1980s, but this going back. You had seen fast acceleration, 0 to 4,000 near instantaneously. Right angle turns, with G-forces at 29. Stealth, something that appears here that, it appears and disappears, sometimes on radar, sometimes visually. And interaction with electrical systems, in some cases without damage. Eyewitness reports, hundreds, and it varied from individuals to thousands of people seeing the thing. The duration, the people think it was just a flash of, light, passing light. Well, sometimes the durations lasted, from months to, and recur over days to months. And distance, everybody thinks is a bright light in the sky. Some of these, in one case I'll get to, when he says, you mean the one I touched? Highly credible witnesses. Physical evidence. Again, 30 years ago, we had many of the things that were mentioned here. Lots and lots of physical evidence already and obtained. This is a most interesting case. Over 90 minutes for the planes flying around, multiple radars picking it up, and a signals intercept. Still don't know what it's highly researched, and bottom line was have no idea what it is. Say, why don't satellites? This is 1984. This is a old DSB, now old DSB satellite in geosynchronous orbit. Something very hot flew right by. What you see is that dark line. It's an IR sensor, so you see something very hot in a very cold regime flying and headed down towards Earth. This was taken over Point Barrow, Alaska. Again, something very hot up there. Don't understand it. I went into NORAD headquarters and asked them a question. I said, do you see things that fly around very fast, accelerate sharp turns? They said, UFOs, yes, and kind of in common. But they said since the 1980s, thousands of reports logged into NORAD. Cash Landrum is a case, if you don't know it, 2 women and a boy, seriously radiated, should have been at LD 100, from the severity and onset of symptoms, should have been dead, didn't die. U.S. got sued, Air Force got sued, came to us in the Army, had a friend of mine who investigated it. There's no doubt that they were physically damaged, but it wasn't us. We were getting sued as if it was an experimental craft. The Japanese airline flight, this is another one that's, we had multiple radars confirming it. They reported something as big as an aircraft carrier flying up with them over Alaska. This is interesting and germane. One of the things I had been an inspector general, and some friends came back to me with a bunch of cases. These were done by Alaskan scouts. And the point is that they understand the environment. But the key issue was the reports were sitting in a drawer. And somebody who knew I had personal interest picked them up and sent them back, as opposed to there's some place to send this stuff. This is a kind of one of the drawings that came from it. You had these big craft, and one of them said what they knew is that it was flying against the wind, and even saw clouds that were going against the wind, which wouldn't happen. The Gulf Breeze case is one, books written on this, but the point was that this is one where you had a duration of 3 years, got to the point where people went out every night. It was so common to sit on the beach and watch for sightings. We had the Iranian case, 76. This is one where 2 aircraft, their American F-4s, went in, approached the craft that had been seeing, again, multiple radars vectored in. As they approached, he said, when I went to fire the missiles, all of a sudden electronics are shut off. They said, spun out and came away, electronic system came back up. Done a lot of work in directed energy weapons. I know how to shut you down. I don't know how to shut you down and bring you back up again. So that was well beyond capability. And again, this is in 76. This is a case in 86 over Sao Paulo. It went on for 3 hours, lots of jets involved. The key issue that was different here is the air minister went public and said, yea, verily, this happened. Most of the time, such officials remain silent. Missiles. This is a famous case, Faded Giant. We had missiles that were shut down, 2 silos, one 6 out of 8, another system 10 out of 10 missiles shut off, scared the hell out of everybody, as you might expect. Lots of studies done on it, came away with, have no idea what did that. We weren't alone. This is one that George Knapp picked up when he was in the Soviet Union, came back as a case. The difference in theirs is you had a UFO flew over and sat there for about 7 or 8 hours, hundreds of witnesses, and all of a sudden their missiles started spinning up, getting ready to launch and say, my God, we're about to start World War III, and we have no way to stop it. This coin case is one that's really interesting in that helicopters flying along, 4 people on, suddenly gets picked up and lifted. Considering up, you have all of the crew that's on the helicopter, you have the ground observations. Again, Bentwaters, I think if you're not familiar with it, or Woodbridge, this is one of the cases. You had 60 to probably 80 now highly credible witnesses. It happened again over a period of days. Walked in, and the deputy base commander, among things, went out to resolve it. He said, no sweat, I'll set it. And all of a sudden, here's an object that's floating through the trees, splits into 5 pieces, goes zipping off in different directions. 2 fly over him and shoot a laser beam in his feet. Again, highly credible witnesses, many, and we've now come up with radar sightings of it. In Belgium, we had many. The major problem area is signal to noise, meaning can't sort out what's real and what's not real. There was material samples. What's the chain of custody on them? Al went through most of these, signed grudge. These are the historical pieces, and mine went from basically 84 to 88. The key issue, though, contrary to popularity, we were never stopped. I was at very high levels. I did the pregnancy test. I would always ask for something and always got it, and with one notable exception, always supportive. Now, one of the things that happened, SDI was one of the biggest programs out there. It was a $5 billion program, so I decided to transition and ask for money. Now, here's a guy who's monitoring space. Clearly, when we walked in, I had folks with me from CIA, DIA, NSA, and Air Force Space Command and all that. He had no idea what the topic was. Believe me, his eyes glazed over, and within a few seconds after we started, I had started the introduction, he goes, wait a minute, who are you guys really? But his point was that he had gone into this, and we were then asking for money. And his bottom line was, I can't do that. And it wasn't that you hadn't got his attention and interest. The point was, if I get caught spending money in this area, they're not going to take that money away. They're going to take a lot more. The assumption is that you're not a good steward. The NIMITZ case is interesting. You saw that with Hal's presentation. All those things are real. But the point is, that's not really new. That had been around for, those characteristics had been observed for decades. I did this to compare the studies between what we did and what Hal did, and there's really only a couple of areas where you see different. But in all cases, you have credible witnesses, multisensory confirmation, unique materials, unexplained maneuvers, high strangeness, certainly. One difference was we got funding. Lou got very modest funding and lots of personal interest. We had no institutional. Again, many people who were individually interested based on their background and what they had seen, but no. One of the key issues, though, no central authority. I understand that's improving a bit, but one of the things we had looked for is where do the reports all go together? The bottom line is no solution. I think Hal would say they've got some hints from a physics perspective, but as far as real solution to these issues, not there. So what is a government? I mean, people think the government should be involved in this. What do they bring? Advanced sensors, brain power from labs, credible witness, sometimes modest funding, but almost certainly they're going to bring a classification aspect. And a lot of this is risk avoidance. Like I say, institutionally, they do not, and today I will argue that many of them see this as a high risk, not from a UFO perspective, but from a public relations perspective. So where do we go? I put up the Human Genome Project, because this is what I think we need. The human genome, they had to study 3.3 billion pairs. They had multiple agencies involved. It ran from 1990 to 2003 before they were able to actually get completion at a cost of about $3 billion. Here's what I think is needed. I think we need an issue on a global scope. Should government be involved? Yeah, probably to some, but you need top scientists. I think what the project is called for is something that looks like the Human Genome Project on steroids. And with that, my guess is 2 orders of magnitude more money, meaning that would be $300 billion. And it takes it, I also don't have a lot of expectation to it. So it's a phenomena that's a global, that's definitely real, and massive amounts of evidence. Where we're going to go, I don't know. But the point is, been down this road before, many times. But moving it to a front burner item, except for individuals, is going to be hard to do.
Thanks, John. So I really take this issue of signal to noise problem. I think it's a very pertinent and in the International Monetary Fund in April came out with a report of the largest problems facing the planet right now, in addition to climate change and labor market disruptions due to artificial intelligence and bots and things like that. One of the major problems they defined was what they called reality fatigue. And it's that when you get so much information, and we're creating these kind of cesspools of self-propagated propaganda, and the era of fake news, where you can just kind of attend to whatever signal that you find the most salient, it's really hard to suss out what reality actually is. And someone, a character like yourself, is, has this kind of bi-personality in the opinions of everyone around, where like either half of people are on board and the other half of have some conspiracy mindset.
You got a question here.
So I guess it's like where we move forward, I guess, is how do we get some kind of stable grounding? Because you're identified one niche, which is this government disclosure. But even as a community, as John Cook pointed out, like even remote viewing, we can remote view and think that we're signaling some target when we're just targeting our own conspiratorial mindsets. So it's really difficult for me to see, like, even as information becomes available, how are we able to judge it?
Good luck. My advice, I deal with the skeptics quite a bit, and my advice to the skeptical community is do nothing, because the UFO and these others will self-immolate. I've got my UFO briefings. I have a slide that says, there's no lower limits to crazy. And I don't care how crazy a story you put out there. And when you go to many of the UFO conferences, those are the folks who have the most attendees. And it is, it can be wild and wonderful. And the problem, particularly when you get to the media who tries to report on it, for them is to sort out what's not. And it's often the loudest wheel. And, sex with aliens is one of the things that sells, and the reptilians, and like I say, I don't care how crazy your story is.
I think you're selling it downstairs.
Is there, yeah. So, now this is, by the way, from SSE perspective, this has been one of the issues all along. How do you raise reality, of these events to a point where it is taken seriously? And particularly in a venue where truth no longer matters, We're no longer fact-driven, and that's a societal issue, not UFOs.
Thank you. Great talk.
Hello, thank you for a great talk. I'm curious what your opinion is of Stephen Greer's disclosure project, and specifically the kind of results they get from their CE5 protocols for initiating contact.
Not sure how to answer this politically correct, but watch your wallet would be the bottom line. Yeah, Frank, everything Greer sends out ends with "send me money." Results are exceedingly limited, so caveat emptor.
Thank you.
Hi. All the things that are labeled no threat are sort of close-ended. It closes off a lot of questions. What about the things that are a threat?
I'm sorry, I missed out. I don't hear well. I'm behind the speakers. Or does somebody want to send me what it is? What, the question again, please?
Okay. All the things that are labeled as no threat are sort of close-ended because there aren't a lot of questions to ask about that. What about the things that are a threat to us?
You'll see an article that's coming out, Patrick's publishing, I guess, next week. What's a threat? I mean, that's a very subjective issue. Hal raised the one, by the way, when I did the study, we raised things as threat, and we did that to be within the institutional boundaries. If you're going to allocate money, the Department of Defense is just that. It is allocated against threats of some various nature. So if you want defense money, you'd better label things as a threat. How people see them is very. Unfortunately, we now live in a fear-based society as well. So kind of across the board, we try to scare the hell out of people for any reason. Again, another societal issue. But what's not a threat? I don't know.
Do we label anything as a threat?
What?
Do we label any of the UFOs? Or?
Well, one of my lines is just because you don't understand it does not mean it's a threat. And unfortunately, many of these things are couched in those terms. If you don't understand it, it must be a threat. One of the issues I get into, had a long discussion again with Hal on this yesterday, as a program manager, how much money, or anybody in the government now, how much money are you going to allocate against finding issues where you have a very low probability of success and still be considered a good steward of the people's money?